Good afternoon. My name is Michael Weinberg. I'm the president of the Economic Institute at the Bay Area Council, and I would like to welcome you here as the live audience for the national webcast of the release of the estimator of the cost of prematurity to business. This is a project that we've been engaged with the March of Dimes for, it's been a couple of years now, with both their team here in California and their team nationally, as well as with a number of the members of the Bay Area Council. The Bay Area Council is a 300-member organization of large employers here in this 9-county San Francisco Bay Area. And a big priority of ours for the last several years has been improving the value that businesses get for their medical spending. And one of the most important places to improve value, which is quality and cost, is in preterm births. We're here not just to save money, but to save money by improving people's lives. And if you can improve the lives of mothers and their babies, there's really no better way to do it. So we've been very, very excited about that. And we greatly appreciate the partnership with the March of Dimes on this project and the partnership with some of our members, including Margaret Shaw is here. We had a number of our businesses that provided senior HR staff to make sure that what we were putting together was also Robin Oxley from Virgin America. Thank you so much for being here. To make sure that what we're putting together is really useful for businesses. So I'm going to give you the run of the show. We've got a really exciting group of speakers that are going to be speaking to you today. And then we'll get going with it. Just one last note, if you're looking for the facilities, they are out to the right past the elevators. So that's really it in terms of housekeeping. So the objective of the day is to understand the critical issue of preterm birth and its impact on business. We're going to be getting an overview of this from Dr. James Byrne, who is the chair of the March of Dimes Program Services Committee and the chair of the Department of the OBGYN department at Santa Clara Medical Center. I'm then going to be talking a little bit about why businesses should care and why businesses do care. Actually, in particular, Bay Area businesses, but certainly businesses throughout the nation as well. This is a huge area of cost for them and a huge opportunity for improving outcomes for mothers and babies. And then we're going to debut the calculator itself. And my colleague Patrick Kellerman will be giving you a demo of the calculator. This calculator and this event will live on our website and through the resources available to the folks that interface with March of Dimes. And so it is a tool that will be available to businesses on an ongoing basis. After that, we'll have Tre McCalister talk about the importance of this project to business, what women can do and what businesses can do about this particular issue, and the role of the Prematurity Cost of Business Steering Committee. She's the co-chair of the National March of Dimes Prematurity of Cost of Business Steering Committee, and therefore the right person to tell you about what they're up to, and a principal of total health management at Mercer. And then we're going to dive even further into the science of this with the help of Dr. Maurice Druzin, who's a professor and vice chair of the and program director of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the Stanford University School of Medicine. So that should be a fantastic presentation as well. So with no further ado, let's get things started. And I'd like to welcome Dr. James Byrne up to the podium.
Good afternoon. I'm going to just provide a bit of a background on the March of Dimes itself and also on prematurity, and then kind of share some of the context for what this means for the lives of the employees of your corporations, but also for all of us as men and women. So as with the first slide, let me see, orientation. So first of all, just March of Dimes. 2015 celebrates the 75th anniversary of the foundation of March of Dimes. It actually has its originations back with FDR. Now, anybody in the room remember actually marching for dimes or cost of living increase? How about quarters? It was the March of Quarters when I was a kid. Where this was actually one of the fundraising efforts where, spurred by the government and the president, people actually reached out into communities to earn bits of dimes to fight a specific disease. And at that time, the disease that was the focus of the March of Dimes was polio, which FDR had been afflicted by, And March of Dimes was one of the leading fundraisers for funds that then went to Jonas Salk and other investigators to help find cures and prevention for polio. So March of Dimes did a fantastic job improving society to help wipe out polio essentially throughout the US and the world. With that mission complete, the March of Dimes then shifted its gears toward protecting children. And that continues to this day. There are three main areas where the March of Dimes focuses. One is the prevention of birth defects. The second is to help address prematurity. And third, maternal health, which again is a huge factor of an investment to help avoid prematurity and other challenges for newborns. Preterm birth is what we're going to be learning about today in more detail with Dr. Druzin, and that's the basis for the calculator. But I'm just curious, for those of us in the room, there's around 30 of us, if we're familiar with what preterm birth is. So preterm birth is any delivery less than 37 weeks. And that's a pretty broad net, because most pregnancies go to around 40 weeks. But less than 37 is pretty close to 40. But 28 weeks is far, far below. So just looking around here, we have about 30 people, anyone in this room who they themselves were born prematurely, or they had a child born prematurely, or a parent or other loved one. So about 4 or 5 hands went up in this room, and I'm grateful that that kind of rate of heart attacks isn't present in us, or strokes, at least not yet. That'll be down the road. Preterm birth is a huge impact on those employed in your organizations and those who are in our society, because very few things have that kind of prevalence. It is the leading cause of death in newborns. And in terms of HR costs, it is actually one of the catastrophic drivers, because a preterm birth at 28 weeks is typically associated with a $1 to $1.5 million cost. So that's why when we speak of preterm birth, we'll have some children born at 36 weeks, which is technically preterm, like my son, where there's minimal, if any, additional cost to society or cost to the healthcare system. But then we'll have others where we'll struggle to keep a child alive, to have a child survive intact, and in order to make that investment, it comes again at a large cost. There's many different causes for preterm birth, and some preterm birth is actually indicated. Sometimes a woman has a disease condition so severe, or her placenta for the child is so dysfunctional that it's actually safest for the mother and or the child to be born prematurely. But a large percentage of preterm births are actually spontaneous, where we really just don't know. With all the advances in science, we don't know why the women have gone into labor. We'll make efforts to try and control the process. We'll certainly have a lot of wonderful technologies intervention to improve outcomes should the mother deliver early. But at the end of the day, it still remains a very nebulous clinical problem, even though it's so prevalent. The challenges with preterm birth are that it impacts pretty much every single organ system of the child's body. And again, particularly at 24 weeks, at 26 weeks, and 28 weeks. So the medical complexity of caring for these children is amazing. And again, one of the benefits of working with the March of Dimes is that if you want to learn more about preterm birth in a very, very close way, you could reach out to our staff and we could help arrange tours of local neonatal intensive care units for you and other leaders in your firms, so you could actually have this sense of what we're discussing. Last week, while I was on service attending, I delivered a child that weighed 1.5 pounds. So you can imagine in about basically the size of that Perrier bottle right there, a living human who was born so prematurely that even the skin is not prepared for that exposure to air. And we have amazing things that we could do in those intensive care units, where miniature fetal newborn monitors monitor the blood flow, monitor their heart rate, monitor blood pressure, in the same way as an adult ICU, but in an area no bigger than this lectern. So it's an incredibly complex and valuable component of healthcare. But even those who graduate from the NICU have an awful lot of long-term consequences. Severe prematurity is associated with challenges for many children throughout the rest of their lives. And again, we have amazing medical technology, to help improve outcomes and actually prevent a lot of these complications, such as vision defects, neuromuscular conditions. And yet, even with that improvement, there's still a challenge for a significant subset of these children. Now, in this area, I think pretty much everyone in this room, we value each one of our brain cells, and we go through a lot of effort through diet and exercise and healthy living to try and maximize our brain cells. The timing of birth has an impact on IQ, and this is a challenge, where sometimes the birth is indicated for protecting the mother's or child's health, and yet it comes with some awareness that even with normal term pregnancies, there's a peak in IQ associated with roughly term 40 weeks. That's a little challenge when you go a few weeks earlier or a few weeks later. So what kind of scale are we talking about? In the US, we have 4 million births a year, of which nearly 380,000 are born prematurely. It's about 1 out of 12. So when we look around this room, approximately 30 people, we actually have, interestingly, among us in this room, statistically, there'd be about 3 of us born prematurely. We multiply that out by our children, and that explains why the show of hands, where so many of us have been impacted directly. Of those 380,000 babies born too soon in the US, nearly 25,000 will not live to see their first birthday. And again, the impact on all aspects of society is touched by this, because unfortunately, this is non-discriminatory. March of Dimes publishes a report card for the US showing preterm birth rates. And this uses data from the Institutes of Health and the CDC. And you'll actually see a color-coded scale here, where in California, by being light blue, like many of these other states, we have a B. Now, some people could be proud with a B. I am not. I don't think many of us in this room would be proud if we were running straight Bs, and particularly for something which has such a huge impact. We have a real gap to get up to an A score. And A would be a significant preterm birth rate of actually less than 8.1%. So again, that 1 out of 12. Our challenge in California is multiple. One, you guys might not be aware, California has about 400,000, excuse me. Yeah, let me back up. We have about 500,000 births a year in California. That might not seem like very much, but that is more than Canada. It's more than Italy. It's more than Portugal and Spain. So we have an entire country worth of births here in California. And we have a diverse population. We have over 300 hospitals that deliver newborns. And of these, again, in California alone, approximately 40,000 a year are born premature. The March of Dimes is having a significant impact improving healthcare in California. We do that in a few different ways. There's close working relationships between the March of Dimes and the California Department of Public Health to help advance programs to help assist women between their pregnancies, have optimal health so that they're most equipped to deal with their pregnancy and hopefully avoid preterm birth. We also work to address healthcare disparities because there's very fascinating data now emerging through large data analysis of state records showing clusters of preterm births in specific communities and specific ethnic groups. There are opportunities that we're continuing to harvest at a national and state level for California March of Dimes-led initiatives, including what we're going to be discussing today to help improve outcomes for women and children. And again, the aspect of partnering with business and partnering with organizations like yours, and this is, I think, so valuable for the contributions each of you makes. We are able to collaborate and actually scale. Because again, if 1 out of 12 births among your employees and their families is born prematurely, the ability to work together to try and improve this health outcome, scaling that out is actually wonderful. It has a real big impact on improving lives in this city, lives throughout the whole state. So I'd like to invite Micah back up and just thank you for a chance to kind of introduce what March of Dimes is and what we're doing to improve things here in California.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Dr. Byrne. So working in healthcare cost control actually can be a very difficult thing to do. A lot of the times, if you save money in one area of the system, you actually end up increasing money in the other area of the system. So you search for the holy grail. And the issue of preterm births, in many ways, is a holy grail issue in terms of value for medical spending, because it's an opportunity not only to save significant costs for businesses, but to improve the lives of mothers and their babies. And as Dr. Byrne's presentation showed, not just in the preterm birth expenses themselves, the expenses in the NICU, but the entire life of some of these children that are born preterm. So in healthcare, you really try to get upstream, you really try to get ahead of things, you try to get ahead of the acute incidents, and there's no place that's further ahead of things in our lives than our birth. So we'll be presenting some numbers today. I think these numbers are very conservative. When you put together a calculator for business, you have to be very conservative, very fact-based, very quantitative in terms of exactly what this is going to save for them. However, I think that if we really brought into account all of the sort of life cycle costs and prevention costs of businesses, these numbers would be even higher, but they're high as it is. So the Institute of Medicine has looked at the costs and really done this global view and talked about how there's $26 billion of costs for preterm birth nationally. And so this is really a gigantic issue for our entire society as well as for businesses themselves. And a lot of it is not even things associated with medical care, but lost productivity. When you have people that have children that have gone through preterm births, it's going to require a lot of time away from work, not only for the mother, potentially for the father and the caregivers and the entire family. So this is an issue that's important for business, not just because of healthcare costs, but also because of productivity. So it affects almost 11% of babies covered by an employer plan. I noticed that's about the same as the rate nationwide, a little bit lower. But you might expect to see a significantly lower number in terms of folks that were covered by employers, but you really don't, which means this is an issue that is affecting folks at every level of the income spectrum and in every part of our economy. It represents a multi-billion-dollar burden on business conservatively. The estimate that the March of Dimes put together with Druzin is that it's a $12 billion excess healthcare cost number every single year. And as we saw in the Institute of Medicine report, that's only one of the slices of the piece of pie. So this is something that it's really important for employers to focus on. And the cost of the individual companies, as I mentioned, are not just the cost of healthcare, it's also the cost of absenteeism, reduced productivity. This is something that ideally has a good outcome, but is a significant impact on the lives of our employees. So, so if you're looking at an uncomplicated birth versus a premature birth, it's a significant delta. But I actually want to pull in something about Dr. Byrne's presentation here. So it shows that an average uncomplicated birth is about $4,000 and an average preterm birth is about $55,000. But there are a lot of things that are preterm birth. You know, you've got your 36-week preterm birth that probably ends up looking a lot more like the uncomplicated births, and then you got your 20-odd week preterm births. And as Dr. Byrne mentioned, these can really reach into the millions of dollars of expenses. So this average number, I think, can mask the fact that particularly for smaller employers that don't sort of average these costs out over a tremendous number of employees, they could end up with expenses that are significantly higher than this average number, which throws in a lot of relatively uncomplicated preterm births. So, but even without that, there's a significant difference in the size of these bars. All right, so what are the cost drivers of this? You've got the inpatient days, outpatient visits, prescriptions filled, and again, this is only really just the tip of the iceberg. And if you're talking about Bay Area companies, two notes there. One is that Bay Area companies in general, particularly in the tech industry, and a lot of the members of the Bay Area Council have relatively younger workforces. So the healthcare costs that they're dealing with are not as much the healthcare costs of multiple chronic conditions that you see with, for example, state workers in San Francisco. Now, there are costs associated with that. But one thing that a lot of tech workers are getting to the point of having right now are babies. And so this is a particularly important issue for Bay Area employers and tech employers, and something that they've had their eyes on for a very long time. The other thing is, our hospitals are relatively expensive here in the Bay Area. So the cost for inpatient days and outpatient visits can be a little bit higher here in Northern California in particular versus the rest of the nation. If you look at hospital costs in California, they are 40 to 50% higher in Northern California than they are in Southern California. So if you can, now, if folks need to be in the hospital, they need to be in the hospital, we'll pay for it. But if there are things you can do, and we'll be learning more about these things as this presentation goes along, to reduce days in the hospital as an employer and improve the lives of your employees and their children, you do it. All right, so the key point is that they pay 12 times as much on average, and that's not the outliers that are really driving the healthcare costs. Each premature baby is adding $50,000, and 1 in 9 babies is born premature. So when you do the math there, businesses are spending as much on that premature baby as they are spending on the other, the other 9. So it's a significant issue for businesses. It's something that they need to invest in, and the numbers here, because you got to do this in a business organization, are very conservative, but I really believe represent only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the total impact of prematurity on businesses. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Kellerman for the big reveal, so to speak, of the calculator that we actually put together with the assistance of our business team and with the partnership of the March of Dimes. So, Patrick.
Thank you, Micah, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. So today I'll run through how we put this together. And it was really there were really 3 pieces to this. There was our part, there was all the wonderful information and resources the March of Dimes has collected over the years, other research they've sponsored, and then our business advisory committee that we put together. Without these folks, we wouldn't have had the on-the-ground sort of theoretical double-checking, to make this happen. So it started with an idea, and actually the Bay Area Council CEO, Jim Wunderman, was in a meeting with the March of Dimes, and the question really came up, what can we do to address an issue that's so critical? And what popped into his head was, well, perhaps our Economic Institute can help out here. So we knew that preterm births are a critical issue, and addressing them makes business sense. The Bay Area Council for several years, with Micah's leadership, has made healthcare costs a key issue. So then the question came up, could an interactive tool be developed to further increase awareness? Things, you can make presentations and have average numbers. It might impact some folks, it might not impact others, but until you can really show some figures that apply to a specific organization, you might not be getting the awareness that you want. So first we outlined some goals, and the first goal is to give a reasonable estimation of the cost to an organization. Again, averages and other things are great, but if we could really provide something with a reasonable level of certainty, that would be our goal. And then the second one was to ensure that the tool was used. And the way to do this was to keep it as user-friendly as possible. And this is something that I really tried to keep in the back of my mind as much as possible, because as I'll explain later, there are other tools and other things businesses can use, not necessarily in this issue area, but in others, that required so many inputs and so much time that it didn't seem to me like they were ever being used. So if something is used, it might have a little bit more of an impact. So the next step was to gather the resources, and the March of Dimes here was critical. They have sponsored, funded, and conducted a ton of their own research. They gave us numbers that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Another thing that we looked at, a question was, are there existing examples of similar tools? We actually didn't know going into this. Turns out, yes. I'll cover those in a second. Best available research, both from March of Dimes and not. And then inputs from actual businesses. We convened a 5-company business advisory committee, and they were instrumental to sort of keeping us grounded and sort of knowing what inputs and outputs would be helpful. Because if Mike and I sat around and thought about this all day, we might come up with a different result. Like I said, we actually found that there were existing tools, and 2 years ago when we started this, there was only one, which has now been removed, but there's a few others now. And I will say that they're all great. They are, however, all fairly complicated. One of the ones that looks to no longer be up as of this morning, it was the first one. It was put together by the CDC, and it was an organizational cost of obesity calculator. And turns out that there are significant costs associated with that. I think the calculator had 8 steps. You had to put in like 20-something parameters. You would have had to contact multiple departments, all of which would probably, in all honesty, increase the accuracy slightly. You might not get as many folks to make it through, or very few folks probably to make it through. So those are these, and these are all a little bit better. I think people are iterating on them, and I think they're getting better. So then after collecting the research, convening the business advisory committee, and checking out similar tools, we had to put it all together. So the costs went into 2 buckets, direct and indirect costs. We have premature birth prevalence and medical expenditures. Those are the hospital costs and the rate of premature births. Then we collected national birth rates by various different strata, age, gender, other things. There are actually, the CDC puts together male birth rates based on age, and industry characteristics, the age of folks in different industries, geographical stuff, all kinds of wonky economic data from the feds. And then indirect costs are absenteeism and productivity losses, and these, there's actually a fair amount of occupational research that goes into these, and there's academics across the country studying which chronic and acute conditions result in the largest productivity losses, and we think that this one is probably right up there. So how it works. So inputs are collected from an organization. It could be an HR or benefits manager, and that's probably most likely, but we think that our calculator was put together to be easy to use and broad enough so that just about anyone with a basic knowledge of your organization could make this happen. Then we apply all the industry and geographic parameters, and these are to increase the accuracy to reflect where you're doing business and what industry you're doing business, the average age of your employees based on industry and geography, all these sorts of things. And then we apply the coefficients from leading research. So this is where the medical costs and productivity losses are sort of calculated and applied. And here is what the final product looks like. This is just a couple screenshots. In a minute, my colleague Camila will switch us over to the actual live web presence. But here's what it looks like, and here's some of the we collect a little bit of information about folks, including an email, so you get an emailed summary of these costs. You can forward it on to other folks in your industry or your organization and say, hey, look at this is really serious, let's do something about it. And we collect a variety of other things that you'll see in a second. So Camila, would you mind switching me over to the browser? All right, so here we are, and again, many thanks to the March of Dimes. They've provided the development assistance, and this will live on their website. We will also have a link on our website to keep this up and keep everyone aware. So first, you put in the name of your company, your name, and email so that you can get the follow-up. You choose an industry, and in our case, other services down at the bottom there. is us, and a state. You can also pick, so you can pick a state if you're primarily doing business there. It actually adds a lot of accuracy. Or you can choose, if you're doing business across the country, you can choose United States, and that will give you probably the best average for that organization. And then you click next, and you get to input how many people are employed. So here we'll do 35. And I'll stop here, and this was a critical juncture in the decision tree of our algorithm. You can add in other parameters or not. And so the critical piece there is or not, and we use industry averages. Other calculators didn't have this, and so you might have to stop here if you were forced to say yes, go to your benefits manager or other folks, calculate the average age of everyone, or how many folks have insurance or not, how many people have spouses or not, all that kind of stuff. So just to keep things quick and simple here, we'll just go estimate cost with the minimal amount of information. And you can see the results. Now, the number of premature births per year at 0.08 is a little bit maybe confusing, but these are just annual costs, and so you can see even in an organization as small as the Bay Area Council, over 10 years we're going to have one premature birth, and that'll impact a significant number of lives. You can see the medical costs, so these are just the direct costs this year. You can see the productivity and absentee losses, and then you can see this total cost here. So even for a small organization, in 1 year, averaging everything out, we see almost a $10,000 cost. So that's a big deal. And then you can click next steps. And here folks can get a couple quick tips on what they can do or next steps they can take. And then if you click Let's Talk, you don't have to do that. Yeah, you can do that.
Sorry.
You can be connected to the March of Dimes, and they have. I know because I received an entire duffel bag of information the first time we ever met. An enormous number of resources for folks. It's really, really great stuff. So. I hope everyone, take a chance after this. It's b2b.marchofdimes.org. You can take a look and peruse through it and all that sort of stuff. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Tre McCalister. She's the co-chair of the National March of Dimes Prematurity Cost of Business Steering Committee, and she's going to outline what businesses can do once you figure out this is all so important.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm happy to be here today representing March of Dimes as a co-chair for the National March of Dimes Prematurity Cost and Business Steering Committee. And there are many things that employers can do to address the cost of prematurity. And this is something that employers do care a lot about. I actually earlier this week had the opportunity to sit down with one of our, I actually work in healthcare consulting, and had the opportunity to work with one of our larger clients to go out and visit one of the hospitals where they are seeing a lot of their cost come from as it relates to costs for pregnancy and newborns. And they're seeing a lot of, in that case, C-sections. And they wanted to understand why the C-section rate was 50% or slightly above versus what the CDC goals are, which is in the mid to upper 20s. And there was dialogue around what it is that the hospital system could do, and then a lot of dialogue around what it is the employers could do. And the focus went back to early education and patient education, and ensuring that the patients and the employees of the employer had a good understanding of what the options were, and they had knowledge. And there's a lot of resources that are offered through March of Dimes, and employers really are paying attention to this cost of prematurity. The cost of prematurity has already been highlighted by Micah and others. $12 billion cost per year, 11% of babies costing 12 times as much as normal birth babies, and 1 in 9 babies being impacted by prematurity. From an employer perspective, when employers are looking at their cost, It's one of the top 3 cost areas that I see among the clients that I work with, very large clients, costs for pregnancy and newborn. In addition to that, it represents 7 of the top 10 procedures that are billed for through insurers. So the cost, there's things that women can do as well. In the workforce, there's about 1.7 million women who are having babies. And so there's also an opportunity that the employer can create an environment that's more supportive of women and new mothers that can make it more accepting for females to actually look for and take advantage of the benefits-related resources that are available through employers to help support healthy pregnancies. So what women can do, many of us have seen these facts before, that there's opportunities to have an impact on the health of the population, the health of the mother, that can have, in turn, create better experiences for throughout the pregnancy and for the health of the baby. With that, women can get preconception health checkups, talk to their doctors, and look for ways that they can lower their risk for preterm births. There is a stigma that's associated sometimes in the workplace. And the reality is a lot of women don't disclose that they're actually pregnant until after 22 weeks. This, in some cases, is later than what can be helpful to be seeking out health-promoting behaviors that can improve the health of the baby and the health of the mother. So as employers, it's critical that employers think about how they can promote health in a workplace setting that's supportive of healthy pregnancies, and that it's okay for women to be thinking about having babies in a workforce. On the employer side, there's things that employers can do. First of all, you can know your cost. And many times there's opportunities that benefits managers and HR sit down and look at what are the true cost drivers. But that's a first step in the right direction. And then having a dialogue, the business leaders having a dialogue with HR benefits managers on what it is that can be done to improve the health of the workforce. What's interesting is many of the things that can be done to improve the health of the workforce are those things which would benefit the overall population, not just the expecting mothers. So improving the health of the population to address things like weight, tobacco cessation, alcohol consumption, those are general health promoting behaviors. And then finally, having the dialogue with the health insurance providers to look at and leverage and communicate the resources that are out there available through the employer benefits paid resources for the employees. In addition, looking at the free resources that are available through March of Dimes, which there is an abundance of those resources. Employers can go out and preview the list of educational resources that are available that Patrick referred to about the duffel bag. These are listed online through the March of Dimes website. And if they're interested, they then can reach out to March of Dimes from that link and request more information. Once you go inside the link, here's a look at what it is that you can see, which is resources that are available before, during, and after the pregnancy that are available for new moms and expecting parents. In addition, there's an abundance of print-related resources which can be requested, both in English and Spanish, and available for employers at no cost. When employers go through and they walk through the Cost Estimator tool, there is an opportunity at the end of that to request those informations, or also the contact information for the March of Dimes that they can access additional resources from. The National Prematurity Costs and Business Steering Committee is also welcoming additional support from employers. As the co-chair of that committee, I encourage you, if you're interested, to come talk to me, and I'd love to talk to you about what it is that we're doing and our goals for next year. Really, the goals are listed here, but we're planning on developing, in addition to the Cost Estimator tool launch, a comprehensive plan for what we can accomplish in 2016 and beyond. And what's most important is that we promote to employers, yourselves and others, the resources that are available through the March of Dimes. And with that, I want to leave you with the contact information for Rhonda Rodriguez with the March of Dimes, who you can reach out to and request these materials and additional information from the March of Dimes. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Maurice Druzin, who's professor and vice chair for the March of Dimes Prematurity Research Center at Stanford University.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. As you know, the March of Dimes has sponsored a prematurity research center at Stanford. There are 4 co-principal investigators. We have Dr. Stevenson, who's the main principal investigator, who's a neonatologist, takes care of little babies when they're born. We have Dr. Paul Weiss, who's a pediatrician and epidemiologist who takes care of babies after they leave the neonatal unit. Dr. Gary Shaw is an epidemiologist with a lot of experience in analyzing data from the state of California. And as Dr. Byrne mentioned, we have many resources in the state. And then there's me, and I'm the obstetrician. And Dr. Byrne mentioned that he delivered a baby that was smaller than that bottle the other day, and so did I. Both of us spend a lot of our time doing clinical work, and probably more than half of the patients we take care of are at risk of or are delivering preterm for very many reasons. What I'll be talking about today is some of the efforts that are in place at Stanford in our Prematurity Research Center, because what we want to go from is a healthy term-looking pregnancy to this. And the question is, how do we go from here to here and avoiding this? This is a preterm baby in an incubator, intubated, multiple lines, costs a lot of money. We should all keep that in mind, that although this is very expensive, the outcomes of newborn care have improved so dramatically over the years that some of these babies actually do very well, but the costs are tremendous. And our objective is not to be here, but to be here. We've already spoken about numbers, so I'm just going to go through this. So again, if we go from here, we would love to deliver a nice healthy term baby, and not this preterm baby. The 2 major factors in deciding when a baby is born by biology, the 2 major areas of interest are the placenta, which is this ugly looking organ, but there's an amazing organ if you think about it. You start with a couple of cells, you end up with this big blob of tissue, which grows, has got multiple factories of hormones. This organ has to work perfectly to go this way versus this way. So the placenta is really an important part of the dynamic here. The other part is the uterus, which is this, and the cervix, which is the final common pathway for all of us who have arrived in this world. You have to come through the cervix. Unless you have a C-section, the cervix becomes irrelevant, but most people deliver through a cervix. The cervix is the opening of the womb, the opening of the uterus. So this, the placenta, the uterus, and the cervix all have to work in perfect harmony to end up with a term fetus. It's almost like an orchestra. You listen to big orchestras, and everything has to be in harmony to get that beautiful music that you are going to get at Davies Symphony Hall or wherever you go and listen to your music. But if a couple of instruments are out of tune, you can hear it, particularly if you're very skilled and a music teacher, whatever. Just 2 instruments out of tune can mess up the whole experience. And this has to be very well orchestrated to be able to go here versus here. And so I want you to remember about what I'm calling the great obstetrical syndromes, coined by Dr. Roberto Romero, one of our well-known investigators, because these great obstetrical syndromes mainly have to do with some problems with the placenta, and the results are preterm birth, preeclampsia, which actually makes up about 1/3 of the indicated preterm births, and other outcomes that are not pleasant for us as parents. So just keep in mind the great obstetrical syndromes. So the placenta, again, this amazing organ. This is a picture of the placenta. The shaggy part here is the placenta. These are the membranes. Here's the fetus, and here's the cord. If you look at a blow up here, you can see the fetus would be here. You've got these membranes, which are these beautiful, clear tissue here. You've got the cord, which connects from the maternal side, which is on this side, to the fetus. And through the umbilical cord comes everything that the fetus needs to grow and end up as a little person after 9 months. Actually, 40 weeks is 10 months, but we never tell anybody that, because they would kill us if we said, you got to go 10 months and not 9 months. So on this basal plate is connected to the mom. This is connected to the mom. And if you can see these little jets of red blood coming through, that's blood coming from the maternal circulation into this space, which is called the intervillous space. And you can see multiple branches, these little trees here, which are called the chorionic villus tree. And it's actually an amazing system, because this maternal blood comes, bathes these villi, and all the nutrients, all the goodies go in, and all the baddies come out through this system. And that's how we end up with a child. Now, this is one of those slides that I call the oh hell slide, or the oh heck slide, when everybody in the audience says, oh heck, he doesn't really expect me to look at this slide, does he? And the answer is no. But what this slide is going to tell us is the complexity of human birth is underappreciated by everyone. We all think there's a simple solution. If the cervix is not working, fix the cervix. If the uterus isn't working or is contracting too early, fix the contractions. What we don't understand is how complex the system is. There's 3 compartments. There's the mother, there's the placenta and the membranes, and there's the fetus. And you can see, if you look at these pathways, each pathway has its own autonomy. So the mother's got this pathway going towards the uterus, the cervix, which is the common pathway for delivery. The fetus has got its own little pathway, because children, they've got their own little minds from the beginning, and it's got its own little pathway. And then the placenta and membranes have their own little pathway. And these pathways connect. This is the orchestra. It all has to work perfectly if you want to have a term birth. Just another thing that we need to talk about, because it is becoming more of a focus of our research, is if you take a couple, if you took, say, and it could be any type of couple, but if you take one partner and the other partner's got a kidney problem and needs a transplant. If you took the kidney from one partner and put it in the other partner, unless they were immunologically perfectly matched, what would happen to that kidney? It would be rejected, because our bodies reject foreign objects. That's how we survive in this world full of bacteria. That's why our vaccines work. Our immune system is highly tuned to reject anything that's going to harm us. Think about it. Sperm and an egg, half the genes in that little developing fetus are foreign. How does the mom not reject that? The answer is she does, but in a highly orchestrated way. And we now know that in term gestation, I don't know if you can see that from the back, but this is one of the things that we've been looking at. At term gestation, the placenta starts dying, really. The placenta has outlived its lifespan. It's called, the big word is senescence, which means you're senile. The placenta becomes senile and starts breaking down. And then we know that the fetus is releasing DNA into the maternal plasma. And at some point in pregnancy, at the right time, with everything orchestrated, mom starts activating her immune system, which up till now has been quiet, has accepted this allograft, has accepted this foreign body, and starts activating its immune system. The membranes, the placenta, the uterine wall, the uterine muscle, the myometrium, and the cervix all get affected by this immune response. We start having contractions. We start thinning out the cervix. We start having the contractions, the membranes rupture, and you get and labor starts. This is supposed to happen at term, greater than 37 weeks. And when it doesn't, when it happens earlier, that's our problem. And all of these factors that we've been kind of talking about impact the last common pathway, the cervix, which reacts to contractions by the uterus to expel this fetus, and you have a baby. And you can see that there are multiple factors that we don't always understand. But for example, uterine overdistension. We know that multiple gestations have a much higher rate of preterm birth because the uterus is distended, and the uterus says, wow, I have got a certain volume, I need to go into labor because that's what I'm supposed to do. And my placenta is now going to deteriorate because it's time. But with twins, that's the wrong time. It's not the right time because it's a much bigger volume that's supposed to be starting labor, but they're not supposed to be delivering early. That's why we have a higher rate with twins and others. And there's multiple factors. So what are we doing at Stanford? We are trying to look at risk factors. We're trying to look at what kind of proteins are involved in the whole process of birth. We're trying to look at the genetic makeup, the DNA, the messenger from the DNA, the RNA, to see what messages are getting mixed up in this orchestra. Why are the oboes now playing out of tune? And at the end of the day, what we also want to know is what is it about cellular behavior that this immune system gets revved up at the wrong time. So we are going to be looking at cytokine profiles are inflammatory markers that are produced when you get exposed to a foreign body. It's things that we produce from certain cells that go over and take care of the invader, kills the bacteria, kills the virus. Microbiome is our makeup of bacteria. We all have a microbiome in our body, and we all live in peace with our microbiome in general. And it's very healthy to have a good microbiome, but we've now found that there are some perturbations in the microbiome that lead to problems and preterm birth. We now know that we can detect cell-free RNA and DNA in the maternal circulation, something which we couldn't do because we didn't have the technology. But one of our professors at Stanford, Steve Quake, actually is one of the first people in the world to put together a system that could take billions of copies of RNA and DNA and actually figure out, is it fetal, is it maternal, is it normal, is it abnormal? And now we have the non-invasive prenatal testing that many of you know about. We just draw a blood sample from mom and you can say, trisomy 21, Down syndrome or not. This was a huge advance. We also keep looking at the genome, and now we're looking at single immune cells to see whether we can learn anything from that. So can we pick up the genetic makeup of the fetus along the spectrum of pregnancy from this little blob here, which is the embryo, up to the point of being a little person at 40 weeks? Can we non-invasively, which means just taking maternal blood is basically what we're calling that non-invasive. I know for you who get stuck, it's invasive, but it's sort of the most minimally invasive thing we can do these days. And the answer is we can do that because we know that fetal DNA and RNA keeps going into the maternal circulation, but the cells keep breaking up. And there's billions of copies of RNA and DNA in maternal circulation, and they get rapidly broken down in about 4 to 5 days. And that's one of the reasons that the non-invasive prenatal testing works. Because in the old days, we used to say we've got to pick up a fetal cell in maternal circulation, take it out, look at the DNA, look at the chromosomes, and then we can make the diagnosis. Well, the problem is fetal cells are immortal. So immortal meaning they don't die. Many of them do not die. So you can have a patient who has one pregnancy, and on her third pregnancy will pick up a fetal cell, and it's the fetal cell from the first pregnancy, not this pregnancy. Cell-free DNA, on the other hand, is rapidly broken down. So if we pick up fetal DNA, cell-free DNA, it's from this pregnancy. And this mixes in the maternal circulation, and I've already spoken about how that works. So we can actually look at maternal circulation, we can figure out what's maternal and what's fetal. So, another oh hell slide, but bear with me. Just look at the colors. And if you're red-green colorblind, forget it. But if you've got good color vision, this is looking at free RNA in the blood, and these are multiple transcripts that are being done by the lab. And this is a control, which means a non-pregnant patient. And this is the first trimester Dr. Byrne mentioned. So the first trimester is 0 through 12 weeks. The second trimester is 12 to 28 weeks. And the third trimester is 28 to 40 weeks. Some people would argue and say the second trimester is to 24 weeks, but 40 weeks doesn't divide in three very equally. So that's the first, second, third trimester, what I've been talking about. This would be the up to 12 weeks, this is up to 28 weeks, and this is to term. And this is postpartum when the patient is now not is delivered. But you can see a distinct color difference in the first trimester, the types of RNA that's being expressed and coming across from the fetus. The greens are down here, there's a lot of different color here. You notice it changes in the second trimester. You notice there's a lot of green now in the third trimester up here, these transcripts. And then postpartum, it looks more like the control group. So there's definitely differential RNA traffic per trimester. And then we looked at preterm birth, and we said, okay, if you've delivered preterm, can we find different transcripts at different trimesters? And this is preterm, first, second, third trimester, postpartum, okay? And this is term, first, second, third, and postpartum. And you can see just by the color that there's a difference. The preterm group have got different color coding at each trimester than the term group, which means that there's some differential expression of the RNA at the time throughout pregnancy. And the preterm group have got a different picture than the term group. Now let's talk about the microbiome, bacteria. Well, did you know, according to Scientific American, that your bacteria outnumber your own cells 10 to 1? Who's in control? We have billions of bacteria in our body, but because we're all sitting here relatively healthy, we're in a great balance. Our bacteria are all working with us, not against us. And we have a very well-known infectious disease specialist, Dr. David Relman and Dr. Dan DiGiulio, been very interested in this for a long time. So what we've been doing is collecting samples from the organs of interest, and you can see the vagina, the mouth, stool, skin, urine. The mouth is obviously not an organ through which the fetus experiences anything, but it does tell us what the bacterial composition is. But mainly the vagina and the lower genital tract. And we've looked at different types of bacteria in each of these systems, in each of these organs. And we looked at non-pregnant women, first, second, third trimester, and post-pregnancy, and they collected billions and billions of specimens of bacteria. And what you can see here is, and this is a pregnancy up to 284 days, which is term, and the pink is vagina and stool, so these are the genital organs, and you can see that if you look across a pregnancy and then postpartum, you can see distinct colonies of bacteria. This is mouth and gum, so they all look pretty much the same. So, and this is vagina and stool and vagina. You can see that there are populations of bacteria that look very similar across the pregnancy and then postpartum. And then we looked at what about the difference between term birth and preterm birth. Is there a difference between the populations? And what we found was there was. And you can see in the preterm birth group, there is a different distribution of samples up here as opposed to going longitudinally. And it continues postpartum. And you say, well, if you've had one preterm birth, you have a much higher risk of recurrent preterm birth. Could it be because your bacteria that led to preterm birth, that was involved in your preterm birth before, actually stay the same and don't go away? So that's why you're at greater risk. And again, another OHEL slide. But what we're doing on this one is we're looking at different types of bacteria, and just accept the fact that these are called lactobacilli, and there are different types of them. You can see hundreds and hundreds of different classifications, but let's talk about type 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is where you have predominantly this type 1, or predominantly type 3, or predominantly type 2 and 3. Type 4 is a very mixed bag. So instead of having predominantly one type of bacteria that really keeps everything in check, in the preterm birth group, we found that you actually have more of the type 4, which is a much more mixed bag and means that there may not be good balance. And that's where the preterm birth comes in. And again, on this slide, and again, this comes from the basic scientist. So I'm the clinician trying to interpret this for you, because they do look a little confusing. But basically over here, this is 40 weeks, this is term, and going down this way, you're going towards preterm. But you can see that the type 4 type of bacteria, that group of bacteria type 4, the little pink dots, as you come down from term, you can see there are very few pink dots. But as you come down in gestational age, you can see the pink dots predominate. So now we know that type 4 lactobacillus colonies seem to predominate in preterm birth. Well, that's another clue that there may be some perturbation here that we need to know about. And of course, because they're basic scientists, they didn't realize that they switched this around, but essentially preterm is now the blue group and term is the pink group, and you can see there's already a distinct difference between term and preterm in the microbiome. And then we asked, is there an opportunity for a patient with that microbiome, the sort of type 4 biome, can she switch to the type 1, 2, or 3, which are the better microbiomes? And so they used what's called Markov chain modeling. And again, I'm a clinician, so I had to learn what this is. And this is basically the chances that something switches state. An example would be if you flip a coin, heads or tails, the thickness of the arrow tells you how robust that change would be. So if you flip a coin, essentially it's a 50-50 chance that you're going to change state, that you're going to go from head to tail, head to tail, head to tail, head to tail. So they apply this Markov chain modeling to what we've just spoken about. And if you look at this, you can see that if you're type 4, your chances of switching to a nicer microbiome, so to speak, these arrows are very, very thin. You're more likely to keep circling and keep your same microbiome with each pregnancy, or for every month that you're living. You're going to keep the same microbiome. The chances of going to a number 1 or a number 3 or a number 5 or a number 2 are very, very small, because these, on the Markov chain, these arrows are very thin. So it tells us that once you've got this set of bacteria that may be implicated in preterm birth, your chances of changing that are not very great. And then finally, back to the immune system. When the pregnancy starts, one of the key problems, one of the key issues is we need to take these cells of the placenta, implant them in the wall of the maternal uterus. So it's like a new growth, right? It's a new organ that's growing into the wall of the uterus to make the connection between the placenta and the mother. These vessels, these blood vessels, they're called spiral arterioles. There's billions of these vessels. They have to grow out of the placenta into the mom's circulation and make a connection, and then they have to be able to carry huge amounts of blood back to the pregnancy. At term, a pregnant uterus has about 600 cc's of blood coming into the uterine circulation per minute. 600 cc's is a big, like a venti cup of coffee, a little more than that, per minute going into the circulation. So that's a lot of blood, carrying all the things that the fetus needs to grow. But getting this vessel to be the perfect size and shape to bring this large amount of blood requires a huge amount of immune signaling to let this happen because of that foreign body reaction. On this side is your reaction to a foreign body. Now, all of these cells, natural killer cells going down this way, are going to reject whatever it is that you're exposing it to. And on this side is what we call the tolerance, fetal-maternal tolerance immune system. And that balance has to be perfect to allow these vessels to develop, grow the placenta, and have a baby. We are looking to see what is it that changes this tolerance, the pregnancy tolerance side, and all these cells that allow the mom to grow the fetus, and then allows these rejection cells to predominate and therefore reject the fetus and make you go into labor. Because I showed you in the beginning that the labor process is one where the immune system starts rejecting the pregnancy. And Gary Nolan, who's one of our very famous basic scientists, can take a cell, a single immune cell, and he can put something on the external surface, on the market external surface, and in the nucleus, and he can measure the response, that cell's response to stress, cell by cell, using this really elegant machinery called CyTOF. And we asked Gary and his group to look at pregnant women and see if we can find a pattern from the immune cell side. And you can see that there are distinct clumps of these cells. So these are tolerance cells, these are non-tolerant cells, these are immune rejection cells, and you see they're starting to cluster in pregnant women. Didn't like that one, huh? And these immune cells set off a process that is a rejection process, but also these cells are there to help repair an injury so that you can heal faster. So these are the types of cells that are also upregulated. So for example, when you have surgery and your wound heals, it's because all of these cells are working in concert to heal your wound. And you've seen that. You may have a cut in your finger, and 5 days later the thing is healed. All of this system has to work well to do that. So these are little clusters of these different cells. They put it together in what I call, as a clinician, a hairball. It looks like a hairball to me, but it's multiple data points looking at the types of signaling and the things that come out of cells, the cytokines, that lead to preterm. And then with sophisticated modeling, they bring it down to, it looks like this, and then it looks like this. So here's different cells, different cells, different cells. Some of them are immune stimulants, some of them are tolerant cells. This is a IL-18 is a cytokine, and they all highly statistically significant. And we come down to this and say, boy, with preterm labor, we know that these cells and this cytokine predominate in that group. And that Nolan's group has just published this paper where they've looked at these cells in patients having surgery. And by looking at the signaling of the cells through that fancy machine, they can tell you who is going to recover quicker and who is not. Because when your immune system is overactive, you're not going to heal as quickly. It has to be perfectly balanced. And we now think that that may be the same kind of principle with pregnancy and preterm birth. It's the immune system that may actually be doing that. So at the end of the day, we're looking at all of these systems. We're trying to look at every system separately and then put it together into this system, and then finally look at the cervix. The cervix is the final root of the fetus before birth, and there are many, many things that affect the cervix that finally lead to preterm birth. All of them, obviously, we've spoken about before, and if you look at this, this is cut through a pregnant woman's abdomen. This is a cervix cut through, and you can see it's about 2 to 3 inches long, and that's the way it's supposed to stay until it's ready. You're ready to deliver. When you're ready to deliver, you go down here where this now is very thin. There's no cervix left, there's no length, and it's dilated 10 centimeters. So you go from a closed cervix to 10 centimeters in a period of a couple of hours of labor, 2 days of labor, many of you know that, and then you deliver a baby. But this is not, this is supposed to be where you're at until you're ready to do this. And if this happens before 37 weeks, you have a preterm birth. There's a few things we do know. We can measure cervical length, and we know that the length of the cervix at each gestational age, and this is cervical length on this axis, and incidence of preterm birth on this axis. So if your cervical length is less than or 10 millimeters, your chance at, say, week 16, your chance of preterm birth is 70%. So we can look at cervical length with an ultrasound and figure out what your risk of preterm birth is in looking at the cervix alone. This is what the cervix looks like if you do an infrastructural. The cervix is a round little nubbin of an organ. There's the internal os, which is the area that's supposed to stay closed and then become 10 centimeters when it's time to deliver. So we know a lot about the cervix, but we know that the cervix, which is long and closed, in 24 hours can absorb water, change its composition, and open from a pinhole to full 10 centimeters and delivery. But we still don't understand exactly what does all of this, so we're trying to look at this. This is an ultrasound, and it may be hard for you to appreciate it, but this is the head, and we're looking from the side. This is the front part of the cervix, which would be the top part, the anterior lip. This is the lower part of the cervix, this part, and this is the cervical canal, which is this little slit here. And we can measure that length, top part, bottom part, measure the length, and we can make those judgments based on that graph that I told you. But that in itself is kind of crude. It's very helpful, and we've done a lot to decrease the risk of recurrent preterm birth. But now what we want to do is look at this in a much more sophisticated way by imaging the cervix with MRI, with ultrasound, and looking at different aspects of the cervix in addition to the RNA expression, the DNA expression, and the immune system expression, because the cervix itself is subject to this as well. So, I'm done. I know you were saying, God, I hope this guy's finishing now. But I think what I was told is that you want to hear about what's going on at Stanford. And this, in a nutshell, is what's going on at Stanford and other prematurity centers across the country supported by the March of Dimes. Not everybody's doing exactly the same thing, but at Stanford, with a lot of our faculty being at the cutting edge of many of these technologies, it's really a rich place to be able to try and bring this all together. And we bring people in who've never even thought about their technology being applied to pregnancy. But there are a few things we can do, and Dr. Byrne mentioned that. We know that if you give a shot called progesterone, and that's one of the initiatives I think that MOD and the state have been doing, for patients who've had previous preterm birth, because they have a high recurrence risk, you can decrease that risk. We know that if you measure the cervix, and there's got certain parameters, and intervene early, you can decrease the risk of recurrent preterm birth. And we now know that, remember I mentioned that 30% of the time we're delivering patients indicated preterm birth because of the great obstetrical syndromes like preeclampsia because the placenta is not working well. We now know that patients who have had this before are at greater risk for recurrence, and we can decrease that risk by just the use of baby aspirin. And you're all going, baby aspirin? Yep, baby aspirin. Over the counter, 80 milligrams, 81 milligrams, baby aspirin is recommended to be used. And all of these measures can reduce the risk of recurrent preterm birth by maybe up to 40%, depending on what literature you look at. Of course, the first thing we want to do is not to have to treat people for recurrent preterm birth. We want to prevent the first preterm birth, particularly the spontaneous preterm birth, because somebody said, well, you know, lifestyle and this and that and the other. Many of our patients walk in having done everything that they were told to do. Eat well, sleep well, everything well. They come in and they deliver and they say, why did I have a preterm baby? Because I did everything right. That's the patient that we like to help. Thank you very much for your attention.
So the funny thing about working in healthcare policy, healthcare benefits, healthcare advocacy, as we all do, is it involves healthcare and hence medicine. And what Dr. Druzin's presentation really reminded us of is in any area, whether it's preterm births or hypertension or whatever it is, medicine is extraordinarily complicated. And so I'm coming out of this presentation inspired to remain focused on these particular issues, but also with some humility. Because we really try to focus on these issues and we really try to move the needle, and as businesses we really try to have policies and benefit designs and so on that are helpful. But the thing we're trying to get at with our benefit designs and our HR policies and so on, wow. I don't know if any of you realized you were signing up for a med school level scientific course on the underlying causes of preterm birth, but we just had one. And thank you so much for the work that you do. Dr. Druzin, thank you so much. Everybody who presented through the March of Dimes. I mentioned sort of this being a holy grail issue for us. This is really a holy grail type of project for us at the Economic Institute. Anytime we can combine science, spreadsheets, with economic data and an impact on business, we have to do it. So thank you everybody for your time and attention today, and this concludes the webinar. Thank you so much.